Ahoy hoy, I'm Planet Walk, and it is Pride Month, the month in which we celebrate people just getting overly mad about queer people existing. Of course, that's only on the internet. If you're a regular person who touches grass, then it becomes a celebration of people being who they are. However, that being said, I've noticed that this Pride Month in particular, there's been a bit of a change in tradition. Nobody notable is complaining about it.
We're having this interview in Pride Month, and so what are my thoughts about Pride Month?
It's kind of weird, but it's also pretty great because sometimes that torrent of queer phobia just makes you not want to have to deal with any of it. Of course, that doesn't mean that there is no queer phobia. There is still some out there, it's just not a torrent, so it's easier to deal with. So with that being said, let's take a look at this Jordan Peterson guy complaining about Pride Month on Fox News. Apparently that's what counts for news now.
Well, the first thing I would say is that you should be very careful what you name things. And pride is not a virtue.
So his first issue with Pride Month is that it's called Pride Month and he doesn't think that pride is a virtue. And I don't care if pride is a virtue or not, because we celebrate plenty of things that aren't virtues, like the new year, birthdays. Are those virtues? I don't really think so, but we celebrate them, so I don't care. And if you really want to dig into the virtue stuff, we could say that sure, pride isn't a virtue, but that doesn't mean that it can't be based on virtues. Like, it might not be a virtue to feel pride from doing a whole lot of good work, but doing a whole lot of good work is a virtue, right?
And I've brought that up with people before, and their objection always is, well, they don't really mean pride. People are just trying to affirm their own identities. And, you know, fair enough, I suppose, to some degree, but that was the name that was chosen, and that's the name that stuck, and pride is a cardinal sin, and there's a reason for that, and the reason is that pride means something like stubborn refusal to change when evidence of error is accruing.
So I don't really know anyone who generally uses pride to mean that. Most people really seem to use it as a term to mean a sense of satisfaction with oneself. This can come from various things, like maybe your accomplishments, how you've changed it over the years, or just being yourself. And to be fair, having too much pride can be a bad thing, but that doesn't mean that all pride is bad.
There's a real tinge of narcissism, sexual narcissism, about the whole pride spectacle.
Okay, hear me out. I kind of agree, but not in the way that Jordan Peterson means it. I do feel like there is a bit of narcissism when people who aren't queer at all decide, oh, you know what would be the best time to take the spotlight away from queer people? Pride Month. I mean, I even made a joke about it right in the beginning of this video.
Do people have the right to express their sexuality the way they see fit? To some degree, if it's consensual and among adults, but generally among human beings with any degree of civilized comportment whatsoever, it's a pretty damn private affair. We tend to be private in our sexual conduct as a species, and so this isn't exactly private.
Okay, so I noticed a bit of a sneaky equivocation fallacy here. He's equating what people do in the bedroom to how people express their sexuality, which are two completely different things. And the reason for this is because an expression of sexuality doesn't have to be explicit. For example, holding someone's hand, that can be viewed as an expression of sexuality, but it is not explicit most of the time. And the thing is, straight people express their sexuality all of the time. Sometimes it even becomes so ingrained in people that it's easy to miss. However, people do notice it when someone expresses their sexuality in a way that isn't considered normal. And that is why people get up in arms about a very small lesbian kiss in a Disney movie that would have been completely acceptable had it been a straight couple kissing.
And it's also the case that identities based on something as narrow as sexual desire, let's say, aren't identities at all. They're pronouncements of subjection to instinctual whim.
Okay, I'm not entirely sure how to respond to that. Like, we could just throw ace people in there and everything that he said just falls apart. It's like it's a vampire or something. But putting that aside, I wouldn't say that these identities are created by gay people. I'd actually say that they're more created by straight people. And the reason for this is because gay people have definitely been a marginalized group, and in some places, they still are. The marginalization of gay people is what created being gay as an identity. There's a reason why nobody has an identity around liking blondes. If people who liked blondes were given a label and discriminated against, then you might start to see people who take that label and use it as an identity.
And I also have a real problem with the idea of the LGBT plus, etc. community, because it's not a community.
I mean, it's felt more like a community to me than any other community that I've been in, but I do wonder what Jordan Peterson actually means by community.
And it's especially not a community right now because the trans-pushing, gender-affirming butchers and liars primarily target young people whose most likely outcome on the sexual front is homosexuality.
That is a very odd thing to say, especially seeing that lesbian, bisexual, and gay people are much more likely to support trans people than straight people are. But that being said, he did make a statement there which I have heard a few times, and that is that they're transing the gays. Now, the thing that I find that this completely ignores is that most people are attracted to the opposite sex or gender. There seems to be something in the brain that says this is who you're attracted to, and it tends to fall along gendered lines. Now, let's say that your gender identity does not align with your sex. This means that there is something in your brain that says that your gender is not the one that you were assigned at birth. Does it not make sense then, with both of these things happening in the brain, that your gender identity might be more indicative of who you're going to be attracted to rather than your sex?
So the transgender affirming butchers and liars are differentially destroying the youthful gay community.
Okay, so I didn't point this out the first time because it's not really relevant to the discussion, but is it just me, or is Jordan Peterson trying to just shove words in there when they're not really needed? Like, yeah, we get it, you don't like trans people, but is it necessary to every time you bring up trans people call them butchers and liars? Like, I could cram adjectives in to describe Jordan Peterson, but saying it every time I want to refer to him, that would just get obnoxious.
There's a famous conservative thinker, Chesterton, and Chesterton has a concept, the fence, and Chesterton's fence is based on the observation that if you're walking somewhere you don't understand and you come across a fence, you should probably not tear it down because you don't know what it keeps in or out. And the Pride movement has torn down a lot of fences, and maybe some of those fences needed to go, but all of them didn't need to go.
Okay, so the problem with this analogy is it assumes that queer people are new to the world and don't know what they're doing when they try to change things. The reality is, though, that queer people and straight people have existed for as long as each other, especially if we just consider, like, people's lifetimes. So if we go back to the fence idea that Jordan Peterson was using, why would cis-het people have a better idea of what that fence is for than queer people? We've both been in the same metaphorical neighborhood for the same amount of time. Nobody has any special knowledge here.
And there's plenty of monsters coming out to play now. And I would say that's especially true on the transgender affirming side. And that's why we're seeing this butchery in the medical community, abetted by idiot allies and driven by greed.
You know, I'm pretty sure the vast majority of trans people do talk out against circumcision done to kids. Are we talking about the same thing?
And those aren't the worst monsters that exist.
Oh, I 100% agree. Matt Walsh is definitely lurking out there somewhere.
If you tear down enough fences, you're going to find out what they're for.
You know, this feels a little bit like Pascal's wager, except applied to a fence, which is not something that I ever thought I'd ever be saying. You've got some people claiming that they know what's behind the fence, and if you tear it down then it's going to be bad. And then you've got people saying that there's nothing behind the fence. So if you don't tear the fence down, then it doesn't matter whether there was something behind the fence or not, at least in this hypothetical. But if you do tear the fence down and there is something behind the fence, then you're in for a bad time, whereas if you tear the fence down and there is nothing behind the fence, then nothing really changes. Again, hypothetically. So the safest option there is to not tear the fence down. But that's just Pascal's wager disguised as a fence, and he thought we wouldn't notice. But I want to offer a different hypothetical. Let's say that there is a bridge that allows people to drive under the bridge or over the bridge. And it was constructed about 80 years ago, let's say. Now, the people that drive over and under this bridge find it pretty useful. They don't have to stop for traffic that is driving perpendicular to them. Now, there are a number of people who don't like this bridge and would like it to be removed, and their reasoning is that it's not a very tall bridge. There's not a lot of space to drive underneath it. This is a problem because buses cannot drive under the bridge, so if you cannot afford a car, you're not able to get where the road under the bridge leads to. Now, realistically, if you tear that bridge down, a bus isn't suddenly going to start taking that route. It could be a few years before that can happen. So if you're someone who finds convenience from this bridge, you might be tempted to say, well, not much would change except for I would be more inconvenienced. Perhaps not realizing that the reason this bridge was constructed wasn't for your convenience, it was to stop buses from going a particular way. Ultimately, that bridge was made to cause problems, and it's been there so long that people don't really think that there's any reason to remove it, because they don't realize the problems that it was made to cause. This is what Jordan Peterson's analogy kind of feels like. There is an issue, but people don't realize the problems that the issue causes. For them, it's a lot easier to keep things as they are because they can't see how that bridge can cause problems. Oh, and by the way, the bridges are real. This is actually a thing that happened to impoverished African American communities.
Now, I read recently, like this week, that support for gay marriage is plummeting. Right, it's like, well, keep pushing. Keep pushing, you're going to lose everything you've gained.
So do you think that might have something to do with the fact that lately there has been a push against all queer people? Because I don't know about you, but the backlash I see every Pride Month is against Pride as a whole, and it has actually kind of been demonstrated by Jordan Peterson in this video. If your problem is just with trans people, then just talk about trans people. You don't have to bring gay people into it by saying that they've got an identity that makes no sense or whatever.
And I'm not celebrating that at all. That's not the point at all.
Then maybe don't talk the way that you have about gay people. Maybe even say positive things about gay people. If you can praise lobsters for being lobsters, I'm sure you can praise gay people for being gay people.
Like, I'm just done with it. I don't like the flag. I think it's a piece of idiocy. I don't understand why it changes every bloody week. I don't know who makes those decisions.
So he's saying he doesn't like the flag, and that there's too many versions of it. So does he just not like all versions? Because all versions are pretty colourful. Does he have a problem with colour? Also, people still use old versions of pride flags. It's just, oh hey, some people really like the new design, so they decide to use it. I don't know, it just feels weird to get mad at a flag. Like, imagine getting mad at a flag because you can't tell what leaf is on it.
I don't like the acronym and all the mystery surrounding it.
Okay, I can actually agree to some extent with this, but again, for different reasons. And that is because if you've got a community that encompasses a lot of different people, then trying to use an acronym to describe everyone in that community can end up leaving some people out, or you end up with a long and unwieldy acronym. That is why I use the term queer, because it doesn't relegate anybody to a plus.
I don't like the fact that the LGBT agenda, whatever that is, increasingly dominates the school system. I don't like the fact that it's targeted at young people.
Okay, but what's the LGBT agenda, and how do you know that it's dominating the school systems if you don't know what it is? It sounds like what he's saying is that he doesn't like young people learning that gay people exist, and that goes back to his misunderstanding about sexual expression versus what people do in the bedroom.
And I think the surgery, the gender-affirming care movement, I think it is Nazi, Auschwitz-level awful.
Okay, so I think that there is a very big difference between choosing to do something versus being forced into a concentration camp. Also, if you're going to bring up Nazis, maybe look into who the Nazis didn't like.
That it should not only stop, and now, as they've decided to do in the UK and in most places in Europe, but I think all the people that were involved in the surgical transition of minors should be imprisoned.
Okay, the problem with what Jordan Peterson is saying here is he's assuming that it's extremely easy for a minor to just waltz in and get gender-affirming surgery. The problem with that is that there are a lot of hospitals that do not allow anyone under 18 to get gender-affirming surgery. There are some that do, but what is the procedure like for allowing that to happen? If the procedure is that you've got to have a certain level of gender dysphoria and have transitioned for a certain amount of time, then that's very different to people just waltzing in and getting gender-affirming surgeries. I feel like guidelines about it aren't discussed because it's easier to worry people about it if they don't feel like there's any safeguards in place. And it also shifts the discussion away from a very important question. If we agree that you shouldn't do gender-affirming surgeries to a minor, are there exceptions that can be made? Just because you generally shouldn't do a thing doesn't mean that there's never a good reason to do it.
And I don't believe that a celebration of an identity that encapsulates something like 3% of the population before it became a fad is inclusive in any manner whatsoever.
Is Jordan Peterson saying that being gay is a fad? Or did he realise what he was about to say there and had to change it at the last minute? He can't be talking about trans people because I don't think I've ever seen anyone claim that 3% of the population is trans. And if you look at the increase in how people are identifying as LGBT, it generally comes from the first 3 letters, not the T. I don't know, it's just a very weird thing to call being gay a fad. It would be like calling being straight a fad.
So I think pretty much all of it's a lie. And it's a dangerous lie, and it's a lie with real monsters hovering on the edges.
You just gotta love how Jordan Peterson isn't giving specifics here, which leaves a lot of room open for interpretation. It really feels like he's gesturing to something where people can say, ah yes, I know what he's talking about there and he's completely right. Whereas if you try to call him out for appealing to that kind of stuff, he can just say, oh, well, that's not what I was talking about.
Enough. As far as I'm concerned, enough pride in the churches, enough pride in the bloody banks. I don't want to walk into the Bank of Nova Scotia and be celebrating pride. It's like I want to go and put my money in or take my money out without any political idiocy and certainly without any celebration of sexuality. I don't know what the hell the banks think they're doing.
Jordan, welcome to capitalism. If a corporation feels like they can make more money by appealing to a certain demographic, they will appeal to that demographic. There is a reason why Disney will try to appeal to LGBT people in places that accept LGBT people, but not in places that don't. So yeah, capitalism is woke, I guess.
For the churches to be flying pride flags, it's like pride is the cardinal Christian sin.
Okay, a bit of a nitpick here, but aren't there like 6 other cardinal sins? Not just pride? Sure, they might not be flying the envy flag. I don't even think that has a flag, but I'm pretty sure Joel Osteen is a cardinal sin, and he runs a megachurch.
What's going on with the flags exactly? What exactly are you celebrating here? Tolerance. It's like, yeah, tolerance of vice is not a virtue, and pride is a vice.
Okay, so does someone want to tell Jordan Peterson that the pride flag doesn't represent all pride? Or are we just going to let him keep waffling on like this? In fact, queer pride flags in general are more representative of the queer aspect rather than the pride aspect. There is this aspect though of don't be ashamed of who you are, which is where the pride part comes from. This may be a bit of a controversial opinion to Jordan Peterson, but I think that churches should welcome queer people. So that was the video, and what did we learn? Yeah, that sounds about right. Anyway, leave a like and subscribe if you like this video. Leave a comment letting me know what you'd like to see me make videos on in the future. As always, a big shout out to my $20 or more patrons: Hugh Jarsz, M.C.Nutkin, Vermont1777, Tony C, Rosyna Keller, KidVicious, Sacha Campbell, definitely not NASA, Morrie, Richard M Chapman, Kaylee, and FistWizard. If you want to support me financially, you can do so on Patreon. There should be a link there, or you could buy me a coffee. I will see you in the next video. Between you and me, happy Pride.